It's not often that I do an actual video review for a book that I DNF'd, but I think a lot of you will actually really like this. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, we're going to be talking about The Traitor God by Cameron Johnston, the first book in the Age of Tyranny duology, and one that I'm honestly surprised doesn't really get talked about as much here. I've had this for a while. I have the first two books. I'm pretty sure I got them from Book Outlet at some point, but I also did not actually realize until I was looking up something about this that this is the author that wrote The Maleficent Seven, which I do recall hearing about, maybe that explains why this didn't end up at all being what I really was thinking of, because from what I had heard, this was like really grimdark, so I was expecting kind of brutal, grimdark. It's called The Traitor God and everything, I feel like in some ways the description, which I don't remember if I actually read it or not before starting, because I notoriously don't really read descriptions, and so sometimes I have the wrong expectations, but usually I do it because I don't really want to have expectations, but I was expecting something a lot more around that side. And you do get some of those elements, but the thing that surprised me the most is this kind of had like a noir feel, because we're following our main character, Edwin Walker, goes by Walker, and he is returning to a city after 10 years. He's a magician, and his friend, who he had like a link with, is murdered, and he's going to try and find out why. So we're playing off the kind of like, detective type of thing where it's, he's not really a detective, but he's trying to track down who killed his friend. We're going with those elements, including old acquaintance who's runs, a house of women of the sheets, and at one point he goes to like a gambling den to try to like track down some leads, seedy underbelly. There's a lot of talk about alchemics and drugs and that type of thing, and the drug trade there. And so it's just like it has that sort of feel, which I really think would do well with a lot of people. And then I noticed too, actually, Peter McLean, author of the Priest Bones War for the Roseland series, has a blurb on this, and that makes a lot of sense. I think people who like that series, I still only read the first book. I do mean to continue, because that one I did like enough to continue on that one, even though I wasn't crazy. But I think people who are into that sort of, like that feel of like noir or like gangster type of thing, I think will find a lot here. This is also one of those books, which I think is partially, like the noir thing, not super my thing, so I wasn't super in there, but it's also the kind of book that has a lot of familiar elements, and it's not necessarily doing like nothing original or just having everything be familiar, but some of it's a little too familiar for me, and that's very much a me complaint. It's a complaint I've had with some other books that are really popular, where it just feels a little too close to things that I've seen before. This does have a lot going on, though, and that's where it's kind of like an interesting mishmash, because the things this reminded me of at points included the Course of Dragon series by Jen Lyons, just because we have a character and we have like multiple timelines and like a ton of different conspiracies and things going on, which isn't quite the same here. We don't have multiple timelines, although there are some flashbacks, so in some ways it feels like that. But some of that feel just where you have a character and you're finding out like things that happened a while back and going here, reminded me of, and just there's a lot of stuff actually going on. And then some of it, though, the funny thing here, and I don't mean this in necessarily a negative way, but largely the writing style of this book reminded me of Michael R. Fletcher, just kind of without the edge. And so I think that's also what kept me from getting more into it, because a lot of it just, I kept thinking about like how Fletcher would have written it, and it was throwing me off because then those things wouldn't happen. And so like, cause I read his Obsidian Path and Beyond Redemption, and this one in some ways reminded me more of Beyond Redemption than Obsidian Path, but just like some of the writing, like I said, if it doesn't really have that edge, because this despite having some like darker stuff, it's more like noir, or like dark than grimdark kind of thing, at least the way that I look at it. And so that's where it just kind of like, it reminded me of that. And so I think because of the fact I struggle with that also personally, if a book reminds me too much of an author, even if it's an author that I like, if it reminds me too much of an author and it's not that author, sometimes it just doesn't work. Like if I'm ever reading something, I'm like, this feels like Sanderson, that's usually not a good thing, because if it feels too much like that author, but it's not that author, my brain just doesn't tend to like it. So that was kind of the thing too. But I think It's if you like Fletcher's stuff and you don't have that particular quirk that I have with it as well, I think this is something worth to check out. Or if you want something that's a little bit less on the crazy side, because Michael R. Fletcher likes this crazy oddball all stuff, and there's some there's some craziness here, but like I said, it's just not quite to that level. So I think this would really be, like I said, it's got a little bit of the darker elements, and it has like kind of the noir, the gangster things. It's also it's billed as being sword and sorcery, which I guess. I feel like sometimes I've read some books that are said to have sword and sorcery elements, and I think of very specific things when I think of sword and sorcery, so it didn't necessarily feel like that, but it has, I think, some of the elements with like the way that the soft magic is done. Because there's magic, and like the character has some sorts of like mind magic powers as well, and then there's talk of like people in the world that basically were really powerful magicians that essentially became gods, that sort of thing as well. There's talk of like gods being killed or whatnot too, which is in the blurb for the record, so not a spoiler. That sort of thing. So there's a lot of wild and crazy things going on, and I think overall it's well written, and I think a lot of people would enjoy this, but between just some of it being a little familiar, having elements that I'm just not a huge fan of, and just feeling a little bit too close to an author that I've liked, but different enough that it made it also like not work for me. Those are kind of the reasons this did not work. But I think honestly, this feels like something that just would, for the people who are don't want to go full bore off the deep end into like the grimmest of the grimdark kind of thing. They want some of those familiar elements. This seems like the kind of thing that would do well with the general masses. So that's why I'm sort of surprised that I've not really heard anything about this, because I really think a lot of people would like it, even if it just didn't work that well for me. So I ended up DNFing. I still rated it 3 stars because I feel like if I would have finished this, it would have been a 3-star. It would have been, because it's the kind of book, I had one recently, Duskfall, where I rated it 3 stars because I felt like it had some issues, but I enjoyed it. And this one is like, I feel like this is good. I'm just not enjoying it that much. So it's kind of that mix. So that's where we ended up. I do think a lot of people, like I said, would like it. So if everything I talked about, whether the good or bad for me, sounded interesting, definitely make sure to check out the Traitor God. That's really it for this one, though. So let me know your comments in the comments if you've read this one, what your thoughts were, if it worked for you, didn't work for you. I'm very curious because, like I said, I feel like people would like this, even though it wasn't me. Let me know in the comments. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the links in the description, as always, for the Patreon if you want to support what I do, as well as Wizard of the Enclave Discord if you want to chat books, whether this book, other books, really anything at all. It's a lot of fun and we'd love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.